There are 4 types of wetlands: temporary, seasonal, semi-permanent, and permanent. And I know that they asked this question on the Envirothon test in some ways, something about these 4. So what defines them to being seasonal, permanent, or temporary? Temporary wetlands will hold water from melting snow and from heavy rain. So the temporary ones will eventually, or most of the time, will dry up, but they may fill up again after a heavy rain. So they are sometimes temporary, but they will or possibly could fill up. Seasonal, then, you might think of seasonal as somewhat like temporary. In the spring, they'll fill up from the snowfall, but they normally dry up at the end of the season. Seasonal ones have 2 vegetation zones. That will be your sedges and your rushes. So sedges look like grasses, and sedges, if you roll them in between the stem between your hands, it'll be a triangular stem instead of round. So that's what a sedge would be. And then rushes are going to have hollow stems that may be pithy or spongy in the center. The bulrush is a common rush found in North Dakota wetlands. So the sedges and rushes, the 2 types of vegetation, and excuse my handwriting here, your seasonal ones, usually used for, they can plant them, but they're usually used for pasture land or haying land, or for, cattle to graze on. Now, semi-permanent wetlands hold water all year long, except during the very dry years. The 3 vegetation zones in a semi-permanent are the outer rings consist of wet meadow circling a shallow marsh, as found in seasonal, and the central zone is deep marsh. These wetlands are usually full of submerged aquatic vegetation. All of these, then there's that cattails often are found growing in semi-permanent or water less than 3 feet deep. Cattails is another vegetation zone for the semi-permanent zone. So you have your outer rings found in the seasonal wetlands, semi-permanent deep marsh, and then your submerged aquatic vegetation, and then your cattails. That's your taller marsh. Permanent wetlands, basins that hold water all year long. They usually don't go dry, but if there is long periods of drought, they will. They're quite large. They have 4 zones: the central deep water without vegetation, surrounded by rings of deep marsh, shallow marsh, and then the wet meadow. Other wetlands, some of them are freshwater, but there are some that are saline wetlands. They do not have vegetation zones. Instead, they are surrounded by muddy shorelines, often covered with the salt. So you see that white stuff. These wetlands can be important nesting areas for piping plover or sandhill cranes. There are 2 wetlands that do not receive their water that fill them up from precipitation. So rain and snow do not fill these up. And this would be a fen and a bog. Fens are fed year-round by seepage from groundwater. The water is often high in alkaline or salts, and they're found on sloping river valleys and in the Turtle Mountains. Bogs, then, are similar to that, but they contain a lot of dead plant material, or peat. Peat, after it decays, becomes your coal. So peat is decaying mosses or other vegetation, and people used to burn peat, and then if it gets pressurized, it becomes your coal. Bogs and fens often occur alongside streams. The Turtle Mountains and the Pembina Hills, fens and bogs, are the old lake beds. The 3 common characteristics of all wetlands is that they have water or contain water at some time during the season or during the year. They all have a soil that we would call a hydric soil, so it would be soil that has been water penetrating. And they all contain plants that live in the water or can live in water. So the locations of wetlands in North Dakota, here's North Dakota here. We have our Red River Valley, the Drift Prairie, Missouri Coteau, and then the Missouri Plateau. So some different things. The Drift Prairie is sometimes called the glaciated plains. That's because of the effect of the glaciers on the land. The Missouri Plateau is formed by the melting of the Wisconsin Glacier, contains larger, deeper, and more permanent wetlands than the drift prairie. The Missouri Plateau has more semi-permanent wetlands, and the Badlands were not formed by the Wisconsin Glacier. Therefore, they do not contain the types of wetlands found in other parts of the states. The Badlands were carved out of the landscape by the actions of the Little Missouri River. Lake Agassiz, the Red River Valley, is the floor of the ancient Lake Agassiz, and that was formed from the glaciers in Canada when they blocked the flow of water moving north. Oxbow Lake at one time on one of the tests at the Envirothon, they asked you what an oxbow lake was, and it's a lake that was created from the change of flow of the river. So if this is my river and it's flowing downstream, so we're going downstream here, and if all of a sudden this water hits and goes through, breaks through this bank, erodes this bank away until it starts flowing from here through to this side, changes the channel, then sediment is going to be piled up in here. So I'm going to use this, and sediment will be piled up there, and eventually our river will start flowing here, and it'll cut off the rest of this river here. And so it will no longer be there, and this over here will become the lake, the Oxbow Lake. So it's water cut off from the main channel due to sediment dropping off or the water finding a faster or more convenient route through erosion down the river. The importance of wetlands, I'd like you, when you answer these on the test, on the Envirothon test, I don't want you to just list these things. I want you to expand on them. So food for migratory birds that are coming through, and they're nesting, and they're creating their eggs and their babies, and so there's a tremendous amount of food that they need in order to do all of those next cycle of their babies. Water, obviously, wetlands and potholes are a necessary water source for all of the animals in that area. Wetlands and the rushes and the reeds and the plants that are growing in those areas provide a tremendous amount of shelter for all the nesting birds, as well as the smaller prey and predators that are preying on them. And then space. If we have enough wetlands, the animals can be evenly spaced and not be crowded. If we start draining our wetlands, then animals are going to have to invade someone else's territory in order to get the water that they need necessary. So all of the importance of wetlands is, these are kind of our obvious ones, but they also act as natural filters for water. When water is pooling up into these wetlands, it slows down the water rushing across, so it doesn't let erosion take place as much when they settle into these potholes. And once it settles there, the water is going to seep through the soil naturally and slowly and become filtered by the soil. So they're natural filters. They are also going to eliminate, or they're going to decrease flooding. Now, over in the Fargo area, they keep draining all of their wetlands, and they have increased flooding in the city. In not just in the city, but in the agriculture, when the river overflows, there's no natural wetlands for it to stop and slow down and soak in. So wetlands have a means of decreasing flooding